Shabbat Shalom. So we are in the season of Hanukkah, of course, and we're in a series on this festival week of lights. And it's a 4-part series, I think. That's my intent. And we're in part 2, and we're going to talk about where it all began. Now think about this for a moment. Last week we discovered that Jesus was involved in this festival of Hanukkah in a way that was truly and profoundly significant. We also learned that this festival was actually an 8-day festival and served kind of as a national holiday in Israel within the first century. 8 days of light, 8 days of festivities. It's the very festival that Jesus spent time getting down to Jerusalem in the winter in order to reveal himself as the light of the world, as the Mashiach. So it's significant in every way. You say, yeah, I know, but that's for Israel, not us, right? Well, who are you? Aren't you grafted into Israel? Didn't Jesus die on the cross so that you, the Gentiles, could be grafted into the olive tree of Israel? Are you not a full citizen of the Israel of God? That's what Paul says in Ephesians chapter 2. You're part of Israel. Therefore, this holy day, this holiday, is also for you and your family. So, go get Veronica. Tell her to grab her harmonica. It's time to celebrate Hanukkah. Get ready, right? Get your game on. So where did it all begin? If it is in the New Testament, and it is John chapter 10, and if Jesus made it a point to travel down in the winter to be there during Hanukkah to reveal himself as the Messiah, then there has to be some antecedent context for this festival, right? If you want, you have bulletins. You can write some questions along the way today on your bulletins. And if I have time, I'll try to address them at the end of the service. In this teaching today, I want to give a brief overview, and it's brief, of the roots and the origins of Hanukkah. We'll discover the Antichrist's timeless agenda. He hates God, he hates the people of God, and he hates the law of God. He comes to replace God, he comes to replace the people of Israel, and to replace the law of God. When we talk about messaging, Hanukkah, there's messaging that comes through this festival to all those that celebrate it. And Hanukkah messaging is simply this: those who persevere shall be saved. That's the message. Those that persevere in covenant faithfulness in the end will be saved. Hanukkah is a reminder to fear not and to remain steadfast in your faith in God and in his holy law. In the end, we will overcome. In the end, we will be saved. The few over the many. The meaning of Hanukkah is essentially the same as every other festival of God. They attacked us. We won. Let's eat. Hanukkah, where it all began. I'm going to go and read a number of texts. I'm not going to speak much about the texts. I'm just trying to get the story out so that you can see the bigger picture. I don't have time to develop it, but you do. So go home and look into these texts and study them and explore the journey and the excitement of Hanukkah. So Hanukkah is rooted in the prophecy of Daniel the prophet. And it's a prophecy that is full of just an amazing story of miracles, signs, and wonders of how God champions the cause of the remnant. That is the remnant, those who persevere in covenant faithfulness, that he comes to rescue and to save. So let's pick up this rich holiday as it finds its beginning in Daniel chapter 8 in his prophecy. I'll just read this. In the 3rd year after the reign of Belshazzar, the king, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, subsequent to the one which appeared to me previously. I looked into the vision, and while I was looking, I was in the citadel of Susa, which is in the province of Elam. And I looked in the vision, and I myself was beside the Ulai canal. Then I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a ram which had 2 horns was standing in front of the canal. Now the 2 horns were long, but one was longer than the other, with the longer one coming up last. I saw the ram butting westward, northward, and southward, and no other beasts could stand before him, nor was there anyone to rescue from his power. But he did as he pleased and magnified himself. This is his vision. The vision is filled with symbology. What's being symbolized here are the rise of the 4 nations that Daniel saw earlier in chapter 2, and now he's given us some insight into these nations. Verse 5, while I was observing, behold, a male goat coming from the west over the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. That's significant to consider. A goat that's moving quickly, right? This goat is moving quickly, and it's coming from the west, and it's not even touching the ground. It speaks of tremendous speed and power. The goat had a conspicuous horn between its eye. He came up to the ram that had 2 horns, which I'd seen standing in the front of the canal, and rushed at him in his mighty wrath. I saw him come beside the ram, and he was enraged at him, and he struck the ram and shattered his 2 horns, and the ram had no strength to withstand him. So he hurled him to the ground and trampled on him, and there was none to rescue the ram from his power. Then the male goat magnified himself exceedingly, but as soon as he was mighty, the large horn was broken, and in its place there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of the heavens. Out of one of them came forth a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land. It's always the little horn you have to worry about, by the way. The little horn has the little horn syndrome, and that's always troublesome, okay? And there's 2 little horns in Daniel. There's one in this kingdom, and then Daniel's already spoken of one that comes later in the 4th kingdom. And these little horns are connected. Okay, so it grew up to the host of heaven, caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth, and it trampled them down. It even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the host, and it removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. And on account of transgression, the host will be given over to the horn along with the regular sacrifices. It will fling truth to the ground and perform its will and prosper. This little horn is in fact an antichrist. Hates God, hates his people. It's going to destroy his temple. It's going to destroy his law in terms of a way of life for his people. This little horn is anti-truth. He has his own truth, his own agenda. Verse 13, then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to that particular one who was speaking, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply with the transgression causes horrors, while the transgression causes horror, so as to allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled? He said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the holy place will be properly restored. Hanukkah, the rededication of the temple that was defiled by the little horn in this vision. This is where Hanukkah finds its roots in the rich soil of the biblical text. Now, we're going to move on to verse 15. Daniel gives the interpretation of the vision. So let's follow down through this interpretation and see what this is all about. When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. And behold, standing before me was one like a man. And I heard the voice of a man behind the banks of the Ulai, and he called out and said, Gabriel, give this man an understanding of the vision. So he came near to where I was standing. And when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, Son of man, understand that the vision pertains to the end of, or to the time of the end. Now, while he was talking with me, I sank into a deep sleep with my face to the ground. But he touched me and made me stand upright. He said, Behold, I'm going to let you know what will occur at the final period of the indignation, for it pertains to the appointed time of the end. Now, when he's talking about the appointed time of the end, he's talking about the appointed time of the end of the things that happen in that vision. He's not talking about the end of human history. It's within the context of the vision and what's going to take place in this particular empire. So let's look at the ram's identity. Daniel chapter 8 and verse 20. The ram which you saw with two horns represents the kings of Media and Persia. This is I believe it is the third kingdom. No, it's the second kingdom, and it's the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians. It's the Medo-Persian kingdom, and it's within this kingdom that this little horn's going to make its rise. So let's look at the goat's identity. The goat comes up and destroys the ram, if you remember. Daniel chapter 8 and verse 21. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece. Greece is the third kingdom in Daniel's vision of the four kingdoms. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece. And the large horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now, who do you think that is? Who's the king of Greece? Who's the king of the new rising superpower in the world? See, the shaggy goat with its horn represented another superpower that would displace the current one. And this one would be much greater than the Medo-Persian Empire. It's none other than Alexander the Great, the first king of the new superpower. And there is no one like him. When it comes to military strategy, there's no one in human history like Alexander the Great. He was phenomenal and very, very young. He rose to power quickly. He was super gifted, and really God raised him up to use him to accomplish his purposes and plans. So it's Alexander the Great. He came in like a mighty wind, and he blew through the Medo-Persian world empire. It just blew apart with his arrival. Let's pick up the reading in the book of Maccabees. The book of Maccabees actually gives the record of the fulfillment of Daniel's vision. So when you read Daniel's vision, if you go to the book of the Maccabees, you'll actually find the fulfillment. It's amazing to connect these dots. So let's pick it up. First Maccabees chapter 1, verses 1 through 2. Alexander, the Macedon, son of Philip, had come from the land of Kittim and defeated Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, whom he succeeded as ruler, at first of Hellas. He undertook many campaigns, gained possession of many fortresses, and put the local kings to death. Verses 3 and 4. So he advanced to the ends of the earth, plundering one nation after another. The earth grew silent before him. Alexander, that's why I call him Alexander the Great. The earth grew silent before him, and his ambitious heart swelled with pride. He assembled very powerful forces and subdued provinces, nations, and princes, and they became his tributaries. Alexander the Great, the rise of Greece, and the destruction of the Medo-Persian Empire, just like Daniel prophesied. Let me come back to Daniel chapter 8. Keep in mind that this great leader, Alexander, will come to power quickly and then also die soon after his ascent as a world ruler. Daniel 8:22, remember what's stated here. It says, the broken horn, in other words, the horn, as soon as it comes to power, the horn breaks. If the horn represents the first king, what that's talking about is the death of the first king. This is in biblical literature, the death of a king. It's the same imagery of when you have this huge cypress tree and the top's cut off. The tree represents a king, and the cutting off at the top represents the death of the king. The broken horn and the four horns that arose in its place represent four kingdoms which will arise from his nation, although not with his power. So after his death, that kingdom will split into 4 kingdoms and then continue on. Let's pick up the reading in Maccabees, the first book, chapter 1, verses 5 through 9. And the time came when Alexander took to his bed in the knowledge that he was dying. He summoned his officers, noblemen who had been brought up with him from his youth, and he divided his kingdom among them while he was still alive. Alexander had reigned 12 years when he had died. Very short reign. What he accomplished in 12 years, becoming a superpower, is just like, it's huge. Verse 8, each of his officers established himself in his own region. All assumed crowns after his death, they and their heirs after them, for many years, bringing increasing evils on the world. Verse 23, in the later period of their rule, this is Daniel again, chapter 8 and verse 23. In the later period of their rule, these 4 kings and their heirs, in the later period of their rule, when the transgressors have run their course, a king will arise. Remember the little horn? The little horn is a king that's going to arise, insolent and skilled in intrigue. His power will be mighty, but not by his own power. And he will destroy to an extraordinary degree and prosper and perform his will. He will destroy mighty men and the holy people. And through his shrewdness, he will cause deceit to succeed by his influence. He will magnify himself in his heart, and he will destroy many while they are at ease. He will even oppose the prince of princes, but he will be broken without human agency. The vision of the evenings and the mornings, which has been told, is true, but keep the vision secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. So, out of Greece will come a little horn, and this little horn is going to just reign in terror over the people of Israel and cause a lot of problems. This is the one that's going to fling truth to the ground. This is the one that's going to destroy the temple. This is the one that will set up the abomination of desolation. This is why he is called an antichrist. It's very clear what's going on here. So out of these 4 horns and their heirs comes this infamous little horn. Let's pick up the reading in the first book of Maccabees, chapter 1 and verse 10. From these rulers of this now, quadrupled kingdom, or it's been divided, and now they've been reigning with their heirs for quite some time. From these, there grew a wicked offshoot, Antiochus Epiphanes, the son of King Antiochus. Once a hostage in Rome, he became king in the 107th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. Verse 11. It was then that there emerged from Israel a set of renegades who led many people astray. Come, they said, let's ally ourselves with the Gentiles surrounding us. For since we separated ourselves from them, many misfortunes have overtaken us. The stage is set. A wicked ruler who hates God, hates his people, wants to replace God, wants to be the ultimate what? Ruler on the earth. He finds a group of renegade Jewish people. People that don't want anything to do with the covenant. People that want to be like the Gentiles around them. People that say, ever since we've lived a separate life according to the way of the Lord that he's given us through Moses, we've been persecuted. We've been misunderstood and persecuted. We're tired of that. We don't want to be persecuted anymore. We want to be accepted. We want to be a part of our nation, of our society. Can we be like you? We want to be like the Gentiles. They're going to appeal to the king later to actually become like the Gentiles. So we have the stage set for the apostasy. This all gives us a frame of reference for everything we find that Jesus says that's coming in his day, and also that Paul says that's coming at the end of the age. This is the background to all of that. Verse 13, 12 and 13. This proposal proved acceptable, and a number of the people eagerly approached the king, who authorized them to practice the Gentiles' observances. Verses 14 and 15. So they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem, such as the Gentiles have. They disguised their circumcision and abandoned the Holy Covenant, submitting to Gentile rule as willing slaves of impiety. It's in this context that Antiochus Epiphanes does his work. He's the little horn. Keep in mind, he's the little horn of Daniel chapter 8, the very Antichrist that comes to destroy the people of God. Jesus said, concerning the soon coming judgment in 70 AD, he says this, let the reader understand. He tells his own people, the abomination of desolation, which in Jewish ears they understood what he was talking about because it had already shown up before in human history. He says it's coming again. Let the reader understand. What does that mean? That's code for you better understand what took place in the days of the Maccabees. Because this whole thing is going to play itself out again in the next empire, as Daniel also points out. See, if we don't understand the dynamics and the agenda of the little horn of Greece, we're not going to recognize and be prepared for the little horn in the fourth empire, the Roman Empire. And if we don't get that, we're not going to be ready when it shows up again later in human history, and then ultimately at the end of human history. This is why Hanukkah is so rich and so important for the lives of believers. Understanding the story of Hanukkah is found in the book of Daniel and recorded as fulfilled in the books of the Maccabees. We are prepared for all that will come. Without it, we're set up to be seduced and deceived, because these antichrists who have gone out into the world, they're pretty slick and pretty savvy. And the unsuspecting, the gullible, are always swept away with them. 1 Maccabees chapter 1. So let's look at the agenda of this Antichrist. Verse 20. After his conquest of Egypt in the year 143, Antiochus turned around and advanced on Israel and Jerusalem in his massive strength. Insolently breaking into the sanctuary, he removed the golden altar and the lampstand for the light and with all of its fittings, together with the table for the loaves of permanent offering, the libation vessels, the cups, the golden censers, the veil, the crowns, and the golden decoration on the front of the temple, which he stripped from everything. He made off with the silver and the gold, the precious vessels. He discovered the secret treasures, seized them, and removing all these, he went back to his own country, having shed much blood and uttered words of extreme arrogance. There was deep mourning in Israel throughout the country. Rulers and elders groaned, girls and young men wasted away. The women's beauty suffered a change. Every bridegroom took up a dirge. The bride sat grief-stricken on her marriage bed. The earth quaked because of its inhabitants, and the whole house of Jacob was clothed with shame. 2 years later, the king sent Mysarch through the cities of Judah. He came to Jerusalem with an impressive force and addressing them with what appeared to be peaceful words. He gained their confidence, then suddenly he fell on the city, dealing it a terrible blow and destroying many of the people of Israel. He pillaged the city, set it on fire, tore down its houses and its encircling wall, took the women and the children captive, and commandeered the cattle. Then he rebuilt the city. They then rebuilt the city of David with a great strong wall and strong towers, and made this their citadel. There they installed a brood of sinners, the renegades, who fortified themselves inside of it, storing arms and provisions, and depositing there the loot that they had collected from Jerusalem. They were to prove a great trouble. It became an ambush for the sanctuary, an evil adversary for Israel at all times. They shed innocent blood all around the sanctuary, defiled the sanctuary itself. The citizens of Jerusalem fled because of them. She became a dwelling place of strangers, estranged from her own offspring. Her children forsook her. Her sanctuary became as forsaken as a desert. Her feasts were turned into mourning, her Sabbaths into a mockery, her honor into a reproach. Her dishonor now fully matched her former glory. For her greatness was turned into grief. The king then issued a proclamation to his whole kingdom that all were to become a single people, each nation renouncing its particular customs. All the Gentiles conformed to the king's decree, and many Israelites chose to accept his religion, sacrificing to idols and profaning the Sabbath. The king also sent edicts by messenger to Jerusalem and the towns of Judah, directing them to adopt customs foreign to the country, banning burnt offerings, sacrifices, and libations from the sanctuary, profaning Sabbaths and feasts, defiling the sanctuary and everything holy, building altars, shrines, and temples for idols, sacrificing pigs and unclean beasts, leaving their sons uncircumcised, and prostituting themselves to all kinds of impurity and abomination, so that they should forget the law and revoke all observance of it. Anyone not obeying the king's command was put to death. Writing in such terms to every part of his kingdom, the king appointed inspectors for the whole people and directed all the towns of Judah to offer sacrifice city by city. Many of the people, that is, every apostate from the law, rallied to them and so committed evil in the country, forcing Israel into hiding in any possible place of refuge. Then on the 15th day of Chislev, that would be approximate to our month of December, the 15th day of Chislev, in the year 145, the king built the appalling abomination on top of the altar of burnt offering. And the altars were built in the surrounding towns of Judah, and incense offered at the doors of the houses and in the streets. Any books of the Torah that came to light were torn up and burned. Whenever anyone was discovered possessing a copy of the covenant or practicing the law, the king's decree sentenced him to death. Month after month, they took harsh action against any offenders they discovered in the towns of Israel. On the 25th day of each month, sacrifice was offered on the altar erected on the top of the altar of burnt offering. Women who had had their children circumcised were put to death according to the edict, with their babies hung around their necks. And members of their household and those who performed the circumcision were executed with them. Yet there were many in Israel who stood firm and found courage to refuse unclean food. They chose death rather than contamination by such fair or profanation of the Holy Covenant, and they were executed. It was truly a dreadful retribution that visited Israel. Now, the thing that's so painful about this is that this happens under the sovereignty of God, perhaps even directed by God. That God brought judgment against Israel because Israel was abandoning the covenant and his ways, wanting to be like the society that they were part of. This replays itself in 70 AD for many of the same exact reasons. This Antichrist, Antiochus Epiphanes, look at his agenda. Look what he does. Understand what his intents are. He has come over and over and over to harass and persecute the people of God. He's coming again. This spirit of Antichrist comes and goes. It uses world empires to accomplish its works. So in summary, the agenda of the little horn, as seen in the fulfillment in the book of Maccabees, was ultimately to destroy the Torah, to remove their worship of the living God and their way of life in terms of covenant faithfulness. Look at the 5 things he legislated. Listen to this. This was legislated. This was a civil law that they then implemented and persecuted the holy people with. You shall not circumcise your sons. That was now illegal. It was penalized by death itself. Number 1, you shall not circumcise your sons. Number 2, you shall reject, neglect, and forget the dietary laws, and you shall eat unclean foods. Number 3, you shall reject, neglect, and forget the festivals and the holy days. Number 4, you shall reject, neglect, and forget the Sabbath. Number 5, you shall embrace pagan holy days and pagan forms of worship. In short, you shall reject, neglect, and forget your God and his law. That's the agenda of this Antichrist. It's the agenda of the spirit of Antichrist. Did the next empire, the Roman Empire, carry on this agenda with its own little horn, just as Jesus warned? Let's look at this. The Roman Emperor Hadrian. In 135 AD, after ruthlessly crushing the Bar Kokhba revolt, he rebuilt on the ruins of Jerusalem a new Roman city, Aelia Capitolina. As Dr. Bacchiacchi states in his blockbuster book, From Sabbath to Sunday, quote, at this time, harsh restrictions were imposed on the Jews. They were expelled from the city, forbidden categorically to re-enter it, and prohibited to practice their religion. It was outlawed, just like Antiochus Epiphanes in Greece. It was outlawed, particularly these two characteristics or characteristic customs, the Sabbath and circumcision. The Roman beast system banned the Torah, banned the religion of the Jews, banned the signs of the covenants, Sabbath and circumcision. And the Roman church later follows suit, and her Gentile Roman popes declared and taught that God has rejected Israel and the Jews. It's bad enough that civil Rome, the final fourth beast, did this and implemented this against Israel, against the Jewish people. But to have then the Roman Christian church follow suit is almost too painful to even visit. The Roman popes taught that God had rejected Israel, that he rejected the Jews, that he replaced them with the Gentile Christian church, and that in fact the church was now the new Israel. They replaced his holy Sabbath with Rome's day of the sun, Sunday. They replaced the Sabbath with Sunday. They replaced all the holy days of God with newly syncretized pagan holy days. Do you see the replay? What Jesus said was, you got to get what happened with this Antiochus Epiphanes guy, because it's coming with the next empire. That agenda will carry on. It's going to happen again. Are you ready? He was trying to prepare his own to escape that. And they came and they did this. It's just shocking to read about it. The church declared to their followers that they were now free from Moses and his law and could and should eat the very things that God said were an abomination. By the 5th century, catch this, by the 5th century, the Roman church made edicts enforced by law that required Jewish converts, Jews who wanted to believe in Jesus and be saved. It required them to be baptized 3 times, not once, because they were Jews. And then after they're going down and coming up in the water after 3 times, they then had to eat a piece of pork in front of the community in order to be part of the church. They had to prove that they really converted to Christianity by doing the very thing that no Jewish person would ever think of doing. Eating that which God said was an abomination. Now you think about that for a moment. I guess by this point in church history, the Lamb of God was no longer what saved his people, but the pig of Rome. Right? You had to eat a piece of pork in order to be part of the church. Is it the pig that saves? The pig of Rome now? Can you see how bizarre this is? Once you move away from the true Messiah and from his people. And what is the most popular meat served at the syncretized festivals of Christmas and Easter? The honey-glazed Christmas ham, the honey-glazed Easter ham. That's tradition. That's a widespread tradition. So in the end, the Roman Church's agenda was pretty much the same as the wicked Antiochus Epiphanes of Daniel's ancient prophecy. Shocking. You look at what he did, and then you look and say, the church, in lockstep, did basically the same thing. It's unthinkable. So in conclusion, in application, Hanukkah means dedication. It inspires us to come back to the Lord, to be faithful to the covenant, to embrace the law of our King. The messaging of Hanukkah, according to Jesus, is this: the lawless one is coming again. Get ready. He plans to defile all things and everyone. His ways and agenda are an abomination that is designed to make the holy desolate. He'll use intimidation, persecution, and civil legislation to pull you into his agenda and his ways. Think about the LGBTQ movement and how powerful that is, influencing the nation at the highest level. Even the Supreme Court fell to its pressure and recognized same-sex marriage as legitimate and then legislated and protects it by law. Think of the legislation of sex ed curriculums designed to foster gender dysphoria in our children via our public schools, protected by law, enforced by law. I was coming out of King Soopers the other day and had some people approach me. They were asking for money, and they asked me if I would be interested in helping to address suicide among high schoolers. I mean, who's going to say no to that, right? So I stopped, thought, you got me. Okay, what's going on? They said, well, suicide is on the rise. And I already knew that because I've been studying that for quite a while now. And yeah, it's almost tripled in the last decade. Suicide among high schoolers. It's way, way up. It's just skyrocketing. So they're saying, hey, we're trying to address this. We have professionals, psychologists, educators, a curriculum, and we're going to bring it into the public schools, and we're going to address the teachers and the students for 12 solid weeks, and we're really going to, address this rise of suicide in our public schools. And I said, well, that's interesting, because you guys have been in control of this for quite some time already. They kind of looked at me like, what's up with that, I said, no, you're the professionals. You need more money? You got so much money. Look at all the money that we have already given to the educational system, to the professionals, to the development of our curriculum in our schools that shape the minds of our young people. We've already given you that. And for decades, you've been undermining our traditional values and our mental health with radical ideas and radical agendas, and force them on our children. You and your political activism hasn't worked. In fact, I think it's your ideas and your activism that has played a significant role in our kids losing hope and becoming desperate and now taking their lives. I gave them $10. I had to give something. But I told them, I said, you know what? The problem isn't money. I said, you guys systematically have failed. I didn't tell them that. Sorry. I wanted to tell them. You have systematically failed. If I could give you a grade, I'd give you an F. Failed. You have failed, utterly failed. You don't get no more money. You were in the seat of power and influence before the rise. You're part of the problem. You're fired. I want to say this. The Antichrist, the spirit of the Antichrist has been rising up last couple decades like never before in our nation. And the ideas and the agendas are in our schools now, our businesses, our politics, even being legislated. It's permeating the nation. We need to follow. We need to come back to the founding fathers and to the founding documents. We need to re-embrace the laws of nature and nature's God, which is code for the laws that are found in creation and the laws that are found in the scriptures. That is the framework of our country, right? Born that way? Yeah. You're born that way. You're a male because you were born that way. You're a female. You were born that way. That's the laws of nature. It's so basic, so fundamental. There's no gay gene. There never was a gay gene, and they all admit it now. There's no gay gene. This is a politicized movement to defile and destroy our children, our way of life. So why do they demand and write laws to force us to accept and accommodate their hate-filled, bigoted, godless agendas? Well, it's the spirit of Antichrist. It was there in the days of the Maccabees. It was, in fact, there at the beginning of civilization. Do you remember the stories of Sodom and Gomorrah? Yeah, the spirit of Antichrist has been here for a long, long time. And to the radical, godless, murderous, haters of all that is good, be careful. Our God is the most high God. And he has weaponized a significant part of his angelic realm. He will never tolerate rebellious agendas to overthrow his rule and his people. He never has nor ever will let his people perish at their hands. Those who hate him and his law will have their rude awakenings. This is the story of Hanukkah, when God rises up and causes the few to overthrow the many. Jesus said, because lawlessness is increased, most people's love will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. That's the context of the drama of Hanukkah. That under intense intimidation, persecution, even martyrdom, keep the faith. Don't give up. Stay faithful to the end. Because if you do, you shall be saved. Even in the martyrdom of people, they're still kept and saved. So learn the lessons of the prophecy of Daniel and escape the Antichrist's timeless agenda in every generation. Next week, we're going to look and see how the Messianic community is the only one that escaped that coming little horn in 70 AD. We'll look at that next week. But let's keep in mind that the fulfillment is found in the record of the Maccabees. Gives us the principles of how we can persevere and win the war under incredible odds that will result in our salvation. As the good book says, here's a call for the endurance of the saints who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. So, get your Hanukkah on. Throw a party at your home. You only need 3 things: a Hanukkah, bunch of lights, food and beverages, and some fellowship. You say, where do I get a Hanukkah? Amazon.com. All kinds of them. Get it shipped to your house. You got plenty of time, but get on it and get your Hanukkah. So next week, we're going to look at part 3, the rest of the story. We're going to look at a family that resisted the agenda of the Antichrist and how they overcame with just a few the superpower of the day. They called others and gathered others to their courageous and righteous resistance. With the help of heaven and through numerous miracles, the few overthrew the many. I want to say to you, even though you are a few, even though we're up against incredible odds in our nation, let's not lose hope. No, let's encourage each other, inspire each other to embrace the law of our King and his ways and to rise up and to expect God to move on our behalf and to overthrow this wicked agenda that's designed to destroy not only the people of God, but the nation that we live in. So hallelujah. Thank you for your questions that I'm not going to answer because I'm out of time. But we'll do this again next week. Shabbat shalom.
And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, This is the way you shall bless the children of Israel. Say to them, May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. And we add, in the name of Yeshua our Messiah, the Prince of Peace, so they shall put my name on the children of Israel, and I will bless them. Receive now the name of Yahweh. Yivarechecha Yahweh ve'ish morecha Yaher Yahweh panav elecha ve'ihunecha Yisa Yahweh panav elecha vayasem lecha shalom. B'shem Yeshua HaMashiach, Sarha Shalom, Shabbat Shalom.